So yes, communication is key to building, growing, and especially repairing relationships. But it can feel really confusing when you're having communication, but conversations only seem to be making things worse. So in today's video, I want to break down the 3 psychological conversation traps that you are subtly falling into, why they kill intimacy, and I want to break down the exact swaps that you need to use today to regain connection and start to rebuild back the relationship extremely deeply. So when it comes to relationship repair, so many people focus and fixate on this idea of being in contact with someone. Being in contact with someone is not the be-all and end-all of relationship repair. In fact, if you are doing it in an ineffective way, you can actually cause more damage than if you weren't in contact whatsoever. So I want to break down the 3 main communication traps that people fall into when trying to repair, regrow, and rebuild a relationship. So one of the biggest traps that people fall into is this diagnosing trap. This is when you can play the therapist. So this comes out in a lot of different ways in communication. In fact, I see it a lot in my comments of people diagnosing their partner. So this diagnosing trap happens when you learn a little bit of psychology and start to analyze why your partner acts a certain way. Oftentimes, weaponizing clinical terms to dump their behavior into a neat kind of little box. So this can manifest in a lot of different ways. Sometimes I see people saying, my partner is a textbook narcissist. They say, my partner has ADHD behaviors. My partner is avoidant. My partner is anxious, avoidant, dismissive. There's a lot of these psychological labels that get thrown around. But one of the biggest things in relationship repair is to remove all of this psychological jargon, not just from communication with your partner, but from your general vocabulary. It's important to stop acting like a clinician evaluating a patient. Instead, you need to speak directly to your partner's individuality and start to ask them actual questions about their actual lived experience. This is so important when it comes to repairing a relationship, especially if your relationship is going through a rough patch. Falling for this diagnosis trap is going to come out in everything that you do. Even if you don't verbally say it, it's going to impact your communication because you're going to be coming from a place of diagnosing them. So, for example, if you ever caught yourself blaming your partner's anxiety or trauma or avoidant tendencies, whatever it is, if you found yourself mentioning these things to your partner, then replace it. Replace it with something along the lines of saying, I can understand that you may be feeling overwhelmed right now. Maybe you would not want to have a conversation with me or based on the way that our conversations have happened in the past. Can you tell me what you're feeling right now? Maybe we can navigate through this together. It's really important to do this because diagnosing is a really cheap move that instantly puts you above your partner. It actually subtly tries to change the power dynamic so that you're above them. You essentially become a doctor or a psychologist and they become the patient, the person that's broken. And what happens, especially if you're trying to repair a relationship, is that it completely strips away their nuance as an individual. Even people with clinical diagnoses act very, very differently. So even if your amateur diagnosis is accurate, they do have anxiety, they do have trauma, whatever it is, it doesn't come even remotely close to understanding the actual raw feeling of living in their shoes. And if you treat your partner or your ex-partner like a textbook case, then what's going to happen is that you're going to create that distance and you're actually going to have a big impact on their anxiety, on their closeness to you. And ultimately, it's going to destroy their confidence in the relationship, proving that to them, you don't have enough respect for them to build an equal, powerful partnership. So that's the biggest trap that I see. But the next trap that I see is what we call the product trap. So this is a really common way that a lot of people sabotage their own conversations. From a base level, how you handle interacting with your partner. The product trap is criticizing the person instead of the process. So the product trap is where you treat your partner like a finished, defective item rather than a human being who is still growing. This is ultimately when you target their character, you criticize their character. And again, this is an internal process that we do, but it comes out externally within communication. So if you are criticizing your partner's character, this is such a them thing to do. This is typical of them. This is what they've always done. When you target their character, this ultimately has the impact that it makes them feel permanently flawed and immediately raises defenses. So it's important if you're trying to repair a relationship to stop treating your partner's behavior as a permanent character flaw. This is what we've spoken about a lot on the channel, which is called the actor-observer bias. This is shifting your focus entirely away from who they are and place it strictly on the environment, on what happened. In simply doing this, this stops treating your partner like a finished product and treats them as a ongoing process. Processes can be iterated. Processes can change, processes can grow, and we iterate processes based on the environment, based on the external factors that are happening around. So within your communication, stop attacking character. For example, you are so lazy, you are so irresponsible, you're mean. This is attacking their person. So criticizing character causes a lot of damage. But this doesn't mean you don't have to be critical, but we can criticize the processes and the environment rather than the individual. So instead of saying, you're irresponsible with money, we can change it to criticizing the process. I think the way that we've managed the budget this month didn't work as well as I'd hoped. What do you think about being able to take a look at how we do it and maybe start to make some tweaks? What do you think? In this way, you're shifting the focus away from their character and you're switching it on to focusing on the process. So the psychologist Carl Rogers famously stated, people are processes, not products. It's because products are static, they're inanimate, and they're unchangeable, right? If you think about a product, it is finished, it is done with, it is the end of a process. But processes are dynamic, they're constantly evolving. So when you criticize a person, you kind of freeze them in this cage of shame. When you criticize the process, you start to create an environment where you can both collaborate to build a better overall system. This is really, really important. Once we shift away from character and onto processes, then it becomes a lot easier to be able to focus on what is effective for both you as individuals and the relationship as a whole. So you can still build the relationship while still being able to be critical of things that are ineffective. This is going to come out in all of your communication. And this can be a delicate balance, but it's an important one nonetheless. This is, what I do with members is work on these communications so that you can start the repair process of the relationship. Shifting away from blaming the individual character is one of the most fundamental concepts to learn. And if you want to start this journey too, then join my relationship bootcamp. This is where all my members start turning their relationships around and start changing the way that you see and act in relationships in order to repair it from the ground up. All you have to do is click on the link in the description if you want to grab a spot. So once you stop attacking their character, you have to watch out for an even more deceptive trap, which is the labeling trap. So the labeling trap is when you assign a rigid identity to your partner. So this may sound similar to the last one, but it's actually quite different. The labeling trap is not just about a negative label. It can actually still be a positive one. Labeling reduces a complex human being into a static single object. So if you want to change your communication and you want to start rebuilding your relationship, it's important that you get rid of these absolute identity binding labels from your vocabulary. When you're communicating, especially if you're repairing a relationship, a lot of people fall for this idea of praising their partner. They go from maybe being very critical to suddenly going, oh, well, you're a good person, you're an amazing person, you're so smart, you're so special. But the problem is even the positive labels can have a negative impact on the relationship. So shifting away from labeling them with praise or negativity and shifting over to addressing the specific effort, choice, or behavior in the present moment, rather than applying a permanent stamp to them. So for example, instead of saying something like, you're really smart, you're going to do so well in your exams, shifting away from that onto the process. So for example, I really admire the effort and the discipline that you've put into studying for your exams. The reason why is that even good labels can be toxic. When you label your partner as the smart one or the perfect one, you're so beautiful, you're perfect, you're incredible, you're amazing, you are still creating this static, impossible standard for them to hit. And the moment that they make a mistake, that label shatters. So let's say, for example, you praise them as being smart. This may feel good in the moment, but let's say they fail their exam. What does that mean to them? Does that mean they're stupid now because they didn't do something smart? This can actually cause a bigger disconnect between you and them because you're putting this label on them that they may not be able to always hit. But if you're praising the process, you're praising the actions that they take. And then even worse is that this creates a bigger distance between you and your partner, because they start to think that you don't actually know the real flawed version of them. And this causes them to start to disconnect themselves from disappointing you. So this is why it's so important to shift away from these labels, from these diagnoses, and from this criticism of them and their character, and shifting onto criticizing environments and processes. These shifts alone will come out in all of your communication and will actually start to increase the bond between you and your partner, start to rebuild attraction, and become the foundation of repairing a relationship. And this is why when it comes to repairing a relationship, a lot of people try to jump in with these long letters sort of praising their partner, talking all about how incredibly smart they are, how incredibly big-hearted they are, how they've realized that their partner can do no wrong, and they lavish all of this praise onto them. And what this does is this increases the pressure to be perfect, which they never will be. I've actually done a deeper dive video on this letter, is what I call it. Writing this letter through tough times in a relationship, praising your partner actually causes more and more distance between you both. So this is why it's so important to learn the right communication skills, to know how to communicate in a way that is repairing the relationship before you start having these bigger conversations. Anyway, I'll leave you with that deeper dive video on the letter, and I'll see you over there.